So I spend a lot of time in the highways, and I like this season a lot because you get to see murmurations very often. And yeah, I definitely wanted to put this picture here of a flock of birds because I feel that when minds get together, when we share knowledge like what we're doing here, we're also in a way acting like this flock of birds, just trying to find a better direction wherever we are actually supposed to go. And yeah, today I'm going to talk to you about our experience in the enterprise. Let me see if this clicker is... Apparently my clicker is not going to do it. Yeah, okay. So, hi, I'm Roldan. I work as engineering manager at Passionate People. I want to tell you just a quick thing about Passionate People. Passionate People, we do consulting, development with our customers, recruitment, placement, and we also do training and workshops. And this is a condensed version of a workshop we're doing in actually advanced Vue.js patterns. In Passionate People, we work with all the frameworks and tools that we're talking about and making fun of today here, because we like technology and we like helping our customers achieve great things. We have worked with many companies here in the Netherlands, and this is the shameless plug of today. We're offering a free 2-hour consultation for you or your company. So just grab the QR, which will be at the end of the presentation as well. Now, before I talk about Vue.js in the enterprise, we have seen in the experience that we have with our customers that Vue is being more and more present in the enterprise world. There are just a bunch of common names that are always thrown around when talking about Vue.js in large-scale applications. Some names that are present globally, some names that are even a Dutch, very famous company there, where I happen to be a consultant as well. And the reason why we see Vue being more present in the enterprise is because, first of all, it's on the description of the framework itself. It's progressive. You can just start using it bit by bit if you want. You don't need to rewrite your whole thing. Just put a little sprinkle of Vue here and there. It will work. It's also very beginner-friendly for developers that are very experienced in other frameworks. If they need to touch some Vue, they will probably, not necessarily complain about it. So it's friendly to begin with. Those animations are strange. Now, this is also a very interesting point that we have seen when talking to customers about why they chose Vue.js. Your mileage may vary. But some companies, they actually are very interested in Vue being in an independent framework. You know, of course, that other frameworks have strong support from very big companies, very large or tech organizations. And that's always like a kind of concern for some companies. And the fact that there's a very big community of independent developers behind it, it's also quite interesting. Sorry about that animation. And yeah. The community and the ecosystem itself is also like a very important selling point for whenever we have to ask, like, why did you actually go to Vue? Well, the community is there. It's always very friendly. There haven't been any like huge drama involved in the community. Most recently, the RFC that tried to, propose a change in the syntax, and then, a holy war started, but it was actually, the RFC worked as it was intended because the community was willing to discuss it. So we have gathered some patterns and features that we see in our experience using Vue in the enterprise, and I'm going to share 10 of them with you today, if time allows it. Most of them, with the exception of the first one, are actually built into Vue, and that's actually one thing that I want to share with you. We have seen that enterprises like using Vue out of the box. They seldom want to like include a lot of plugins, a lot of things that will bloat it, because we all have experience doing that in the past with other frameworks. So many of them, 9 of them, are actually built-in things that you can do with Vue. The exception being this one. So what happens in a lot of enterprises that we have seen is that they have these T-shaped teams, right? Where the homo frontendalis that Puya was just talking about, they're more involved nowadays in the DevOps engineer kind of thing, in the full stack development side. And backend languages are more often strongly typed. They use classes. These developers have a lot of object-oriented experience. So they want to see the Vue.js code behave in that way, and not necessarily writing TypeScript, which is also a way of achieving that. So Vue Property Decorator and a couple of other packages that I'm going to show to you actually allow them to do this, and we have seen this in the wild. I have an example here of a very simple component, which is, if you have seen Vue.js, this is run-of-the-mill component. But with Vue Property Decorator, you can write it in a syntax that's very familiar to people with experience in OOP, or developers that are familiar with Angular, for instance, because of the component annotation. Now, if we take a look at that code, some people may agree that this is more readable. It's debatable. But we have seen this. This is an answer that we sometimes hear about it. There's a caveat if you use this. Decorators, as they are being shown here, are still a stage 2 proposal, so you need Babel in order to make them work. If you don't want to use Babel, you can actually still use that decorator class by using it as a function. In this case, I moved the props to that component decoration, which is always here. And also, the class is actually an argument to the function that's returned by the decorator. So you don't need Babel to use this if you want. So as a bonus, if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can also check these 3 related packages, Vuex class component, Vue class component, which is pretty similar to what we're doing here. Vuex class, which allows you to do, if you're familiar with Vuex and the way that map mutations and map actions work, this syntax is very clear to a lot of people rather than passing strings with map mutations and all of that. So that's Vuex class. And of course, if you're using Nuxt, you can also use Nuxt Property Decorator, it gives you a lot of additional decorators. So on the second topic, that's actually very similar and I was very interested to see that the web components talk mentions slots, because it's also one of the most used things that we see. Most importantly, actually, we see it to build layouts, to specify different areas where content can be inserted. And you see it here. I have a very simple layout that has a navigation with a slot named nav and a footer. And the app that's using that is just saying, I'm going to use this component. Here I have some components that will go into the navigation. I have whatever other components will go into the default slot. And then these ones will go in the footer. This is actually very useful and very powerful, because you can not only use slots to place things into the page, but also to pass configuration or attributes to the elements that are inside that slot. So in this, again, component, you see here a slot that says, that has an attribute called message. And whenever we're using this component, we insert something into that slot, and we can actually read that message. So you can think of this as a pattern that a lot of companies use to pass settings, to pass configuration that's available somewhere else in the page that's loaded. It's a kind of data provider pattern that I actually use in another of the tips. So remember this one. And of course, this also works with with named scopes. So you can specify a name of a particular slot to read their attributes from. The third one that I'm going to share with you today is functional components. Functional components are very simple components that don't have a state, so they're stateless components. And if you're writing this kind of components, you will notice things like, well, of course, you have to specify that they're functional. and you can use any properties that are passed to them directly. You don't need to write a script tag. You don't need to write anything else. This is supported out of the box. But it's important to notice that they don't have data property, they don't have state property, they cannot have computed properties, and most importantly, they don't have a lexical this, because they are just essentially pure components that just render a thing. Every time that the props change, they will return the same thing consistently. So no side effects are possible. And you use them in the exact same way that you would use any other Vue component. Now, functional components can also be, you can also declare them inline, so you don't need to have a separate file like this one. You can write them in your, in any other component that's actually going to use them. And this is a pattern that we have seen is very common across people that are doing a lot of data manipulation, that have a lot of very strong background in functional programming, because this just makes sense to pass a component to process data, and this is the same thing that we saw here, just in a declarative way. So we have a component, functional true, and we need to specify what this will be rendered like. In this case, I used JSX to show this example, but this can be any other alternative of using the render function. You can use the create element function itself. You can pass a string template. You can do whatever you need here, and then just use it in the same way like this. Now, all right. We're going to start approaching a strange topic, global registration. And I want to give a small disclaimer here, because I know that whenever we talk about global registration in any kind of framework or in any kind of project, a lot of eyebrows are raised because we are trying to go the other way, right? Like tree shaking and optimization and not bringing the whole world into our application. But there are valid cases to do such a thing. And even in the Vue documentation, there's an example, which is what I'm going to show here. But they mention that this is for base components. And they make it very clear that this is supposed to be in case you have base components that you're going to be using in all your application, in all your components, and you don't want to have a long list like this in every component that you use them. So they provide even this example, which is using Webpack, to read all the components in a directory and then just actually registering them as a global component. Now, it's for base components. Remember that, base components, otherwise I don't want to read a lot of emails about how this is a bad idea. However, there are cases where you want to do something like that for your component, your non-base components, so components that you're going to be using in all your pages, for instance. Or, it's typical that sometimes you have lists of things that you import a lot of times, like this. An alternative to avoid using global registration, but using something that gives you the freedom to not having to enumerate every single component in a separate import, is that you can use ESX export from syntax in order to import your Vue components. You import them as a default, of course, and then you re-export them with the name that you want to make them available. Then you can simplify this and have a single line for your import, or a bit more readable instead of 30 different imports when something like this happens. Again, I named it even global-ish registration in case you're paying attention, because I know global is sometimes like a pain point there, but this is something that we have seen, especially this one, whenever there are a lot of components that come from a big design system, or that are just, components are used in different places of the application that they need to be somewhat available from a single place. This is a nice pattern to follow. Now, one of the things that Vue offers are built-in directives. And they're very powerful, they are very useful, and if you have developed any kind of Vue application, you have definitely used their directives. But there are many others in the wild This is another, actually, exception to my rule of being built-in things. And I have a link for you, because I don't want to enumerate all of them. This is, I seldom save things in my bookmarks directory, but when I wrote this article, I was like, yeah, I'm going to bookmark that. Because they actually share, I'm going to leave the link there, they share a lot of very useful directives that are super small and really boost your productivity. Believe me, I don't want you to use things to add packages to your directories that you're not going to be using, but I guarantee that if you go there and you see the list, you will see something that you spent some time doing, and we're like, should have used that. These are some of my favorites, so if you have ever had to do this copy to clipboard thing, just vclipboard, done. It's really useful, it's really simple to configure, it's really small. Scroll to, that kind of thing where you can scroll very smoothly to an element, done, done and done. So I really recommend you to take a look at this list, but also, everyone took the QR, all right. Also, you can write your own directives, which is a very nice thing. You don't need to rely on someone else to build it for you. You can provide a single directive to your team, and that's all you need to write a directive, actually. You can even write them directly in the component that they're going to be using it. It's a bit odd you would do that, but you can. And you use them in the same way as you would use any other directives. And the Vue documentation is really comprehensive around directives, because you can do a lot of more powerful things with this, but it's just a small proof of what you can do. Remember, check that link. Next up, dynamic components. So now we're entering something that we see very often with large-scale applications. I'm pretty sure all of you at some point had to build a form with validation, with fields that came from an API, most likely. Not the data for the fields themselves. So something like this, or even a very dynamic website where you have an API result, providing you a declarative way of saying, well, I want to build a page based on this JSON, right? So imagine you have this as the output of a headless CMS. And in this example, every component is declaratively, but this, I'm talking about components, but they're just JSON objects. So every JSON object is composed of a type and a data, right? Just bear with me for a moment. So Vue allows you to use dynamic components thanks to the component tag. And if you take this API output as the input for this v4 directive, you can then just iterate over the elements in that array and dynamically create whatever element you need based on that string, which is the component name. So if you remember the JSON, that means it will actually be transformed after this is done into two elements, one column and one button. Then thanks to vbind, which means that everything that's here will be bound to the props of that object. Then the information is passed to the relevant component. So this is transformed into that. The combination of the component tag and vbind, it's really, really powerful, especially for these situations, because it enables you to write polymorphic components, essentially. So you pass whatever shape of data, and it will be translated into the components that you're actually wanting to use with their props passed. Next is asynchronous components. So again, in the vein of trying to reduce bundle size, in the vein of trying to make things a bit more modular, you can think of a small application, trivial application like this, which says, yeah, I have 3 different things based on a given step. I'm going to load the first step because, yeah, it has a default value of 1, so I'm pretty sure that the step 1 will always be there. But I want to make sure that I actually load the other 2 steps when I need them. So Vue provides you an out-of-the-box way to do this. This is thanks to the integration with Webpack and Vue CLI. And it's just a matter of saying, this is the component I want to load. This will load it when you, oh, of course. Oh, I thought I had to keep it. This means that whenever the step changes, actually the promise in order to build this will be executed. When it's fulfilled, the template will be updated with the right component. And Vue provides a lot of other features that around this functionality. For instance, you can specify a loading component that is shown while this is loading, an error component to show whenever an error happened, and even configure if there's a delay or timeout in case you need to fine-tune this. And pro tip, you need to, because the default value for the timeout is infinity. So yeah, you need to take care of that. Control components. Have you heard this term before? If you're from the React world, definitely you've heard it. Any Vue developer here that have heard about control components? Fans? No, I thought it. Because this is actually a very common term in React land, but it's something that in Vue is also very, very, very easy to implement. I linked to another article. I'm going to leave the link there. But essentially, in Vue, you can just put information, for example, to an input field like that using the vModal directive. That's pretty straightforward, pretty common, nothing out of the ordinary there. But what happens when you want to do the same thing for your own component, right? Yeah, you can also think that that should work. If I have a form and I give you the values that I want in that form, I should be able to use vModal. You are able to use it. There are a couple things you need to do in order to do that. But then we can take it a step even further, because of course you're going to use vModal inside that nested form, and you may even have an extra level of nesting. So the considerations that you need to take around doing this are described in this very, very nice article by Yeshi Schot. I really recommend you to take a read of it. It's a bit longer for it to be included in the presentation, but it's a very good one. Renderless components. Renderless components are misunderstood components, I would say. A lot of developers that we have talked to, they think they can solve their problem just by including something that won't bloat the DOM, because yeah, they need a data provider or something. And yes, this is a way of doing it. But they are more powerful than just gathering some information. This is an example of a renderless component. It's a component that has no template. And what it does in this example, also in imitating a bit of Lucian's magic, the get document function here is magic. But what it's doing is that it's getting a reference, let's say an ID of a document, going to an API, and then returning whatever came as a document. So you can think that this can be used like this. I have a document ID, and then thanks to that vSlot directive, so scoped slots, I'm getting the document itself and then using it here. That's essentially that bit there. And they can be used for a lot of things. One of them, for instance, is the provider and consumer pattern. I didn't include it in this presentation, but essentially you can think of a renderless component that will just gather the information from different sources and has nothing to do with it. It won't be rendered. It won't do anything with the state or the actions, but it will provide that state and those actions to their child components. And the last one that I have in this series of features is dependency injection. So let's just take a quick look at how to approach a very common thing without dependency injection. I have a button here which has two different things. It can be a primary or secondary button, and based on what class it has, it's a different color. Nothing strange here. But suddenly a requirement appears, and the user should be now able to choose their own theme. Well, it's not very difficult as well, but maybe then these CSS classes are not the best approach because, yeah, I don't think we want to code a single class for each color. So let's just get rid of that. And then let's rename it to my themed button. And I think, okay, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put a theme object as a props. Okay, let's see. Then, yeah, this is strange, bear with me. But if it's a primary, I'm going to read the primary color from the theme. If it's a secondary, I'm going to do the same thing. And yeah, it works. I pass the theme. Yeah, this is not either a primary or secondary, but at least I'm able to pass a theme to the button. Then I put another button. Yeah, I'm not liking this. There must be a better way, right? Because this is horrible. So let's take a quick look about this my theme button. Oh, I see the problem is that we did it without dependency injection. So if we're going to do it with dependency injection, which is the whole point of this talk, it's just a matter in this case actually of moving that theme to an inject property. So no longer a prop, but an inject. Specifying a default is also sometimes, it's also a very good idea. But of course, someone needs to inject this, right? That's why theme provider comes to the rescue. It's a very simple renderless component that actually, the only thing that it does is that it provides a theme. Think of it, this could be actually providing the settings for your application. This could be providing whatever thing you need. In this case, it's doing the theme. These properties may be read from an API in the user's configuration system. But the important thing is that they're being provided. And then you can go from this to something that's a bit more readable. You just wrap all of these components into your theme provider, and the theme will be injected without you having to pass it into each component. And the nice thing about dependency injection in this case is that that injection can happen in any child component regardless of the level. So a grandchild component, a great-grandchild, that can also receive that theme, which is, of course, really useful. So as a little recap, we went all the way through all of these 10 different features. They're something that we see very often in the projects that we work on. And if you like them, I think it's your turn to put them in practice. And don't forget to view some. Yeah, that was a horrible pun. I'm trying to compete with Chris, but yeah, he's the one with the puns. If you like these kind of things and you want to learn more, I really recommend you to search for these articles or these videos because they are, yeah, one of them is a very, very, very nice course on Acre. But yeah, there are a lot of additional resources you can find, these kind of patterns. They may work for you, they may not, but it's always nice to see how other people are doing their thing. And with that, I would like to thank you. I tried.
Thank you as well.